All right, so I want to welcome everybody this afternoon to our presentation about students in schools in the time of COVID. My name's Emily Kile. I'm an attorney in Scottsdale, Arizona, and we practice in the area of estate planning, special needs planning, guardianships and conservatorships, probates, trust administration, and elder law. I'm just thrilled today to have Lori and Hope with us. They practice in the area of issues that go on within the school system, as well as some issues related to DDD services. So I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So I want to make sure they have enough because they have a lot to talk about. And if you have questions, just go ahead and type them in that Q&A box, which you should see at the bottom of your screen. And they'll go ahead and answer those questions at the end. We'll save some time at the end for those questions. So without further ado, Hope and Lori, I will leave it to you to do your presentation and introduce yourselves. Thank you so much for being here. And I've known Hope and Lori for quite some time. We send so many clients over there when they have issues within the school system or with DDD, and we've always had glowing responses back. So we really appreciate the work they do in the community. So thank you, and thank you for being here.
And thank you for having us. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to everyone because we get so many calls. And yes, we love having you as a resource to send our clients to. Emily Kile does pretty much everything we do not do. And a lot of times we will have clients and we make sure that they have guardianships in place if they need it, or conservatorships, and estate plans, of course. So we're so glad to have you out there to send clients to. So today we'll be talking about students in schools in the time of COVID, focusing on students with disabilities, so students with IEPs and students with 504 plans. And we hope to be able to answer a lot of the questions that we are getting on a daily basis. So first, our disclaimer, the information provided is summative only. It's informative for informative purposes. Do not rely on it for legal advice. Every situation is different, so we'll be giving you an overview, but not anything specific to your situation. So just be careful about that. Don't say, oh, we saw Hope and Lori and this is what they said. Your situation may be very different. So what we want to talk about first, and by the way, I'm Hope and this is Lori. Sorry. And so we are education attorneys, and we've been doing this a very long time. And this is all we do every day. Okay, so how did we get to this place? Do your children have a right to an education? You know, people say, oh, I have a constitutional right. Well, it's not actually in the United States Constitution that you have a right to an education. It comes under some other rights that you have, which we're not going to go into right now, but there are liberty interests and stuff like that. But the Arizona Constitution does say that children have a right to an education, and that the legislature shall provide for a system of common schools that are free to every child, and every school district must have it from ages 6 to 21. In Arizona, if your child has an IEP, they can receive services up to the age of 22 if they have not received all of their credits. So again, 6 to 21, but it's 22 in the state of Arizona in certain cases. So when we talk about COVID, we're really talking about weighing, balancing the right to an education and a free and appropriate public education under both an IEP and a 504, because students within a 504 plan all have a right to a free and appropriate public education, against the interests of health and safety. Okay, so a lot of times kids need that in-person instruction to benefit, to get a free and appropriate education, to be able to access the curriculum, but we have to weigh that against the health and safety. So let's start out with some basic information about the law on COVID, and SWD is my acronym for students with disabilities. What's the law on COVID? There is none. There is none. We have guidance, and we'll talk about that, and you always hear about recommendations and guidance and executive orders, and we'll actually explain what all that is. There are no waivers from Congress for the IDEA. That means that schools must implement your child's IEP. There are no changes to the IDEA because of COVID. The information we have is, like I said, guidance only. There's no comprehensive approach. That's why one school district is allowing kids, another school isn't, that some of them have phased openings. Every school district is different. And when I talk about school districts, please understand I'm also including charter schools. So today's presentation only applies to public schools, which are your local school district and charter schools. So decisions to open or not, and what kind of learning instruction to provide, that is left to the individual school districts and the charter schools. There's some guidance from the state education department, but we don't have a comprehensive plan. And the resources that are out there and that we'll be referencing are the American Academy of Pediatrics that talks about the health risks, the Arizona Department of Education, the Centers for Disease Control, Governor Ducey's executive orders, and the United States Department of Education, which includes the Office of Civil Rights, OCR. On the first screen, you may remember I put the date, today's date, September 23rd. The reason is that this changes almost daily. So the last time I updated this presentation, I believe, was on Friday, the 18th. And it gets, but we are constantly on the Arizona Department of Education website bookmarking information, and we will have those bookmarks for you. So
these are the learning environments. There are basically three. There are, during COVID-19, the terms can be confusing. Sometimes they're used interchangeably when they're not really interchangeable. They're misrepresented. So I'm just going to go through them. In-person instruction is actually going to school, physically going to school like we used to pre-COVID. Of course, now there are masks and social distancing. And it's the traditional way of going to school. And some schools are already offering that, and some parents have chosen that. On-site learning opportunities, and the picture in there is an actual picture of Coronado High School. I deem it more like a babysitting place. It's a place where parents or guardians can send their children during the regular school day to do work, but not get in-person instruction. And there's a misconception. I've had people call saying, you know, my student or my child is going to an on-site learning spot, but there's no teacher there. Well, there doesn't have to be a teacher. There is supervision. It's to keep children safe, especially for homes where both parents work and there is no one at home. So it's a safe place. They get meals there and they are supervised, but they are still doing the work on their own. The third environment is distance learning. And we have a picture of a child on a computer, but it is not necessarily on the computer. And we'll go through some of those terms as well. It's sometimes called the DLP, Distance Learning Program. So you can have a child that's learning on a computer. They could be real time with a teacher. They could be watching pre-recorded teachings, or a child might not be using a computer at all. It could be work is being sent home in packages and sent back, and the child is actually not even using a computer or not watching lessons on there. So there is also an understanding that IEPs must be followed even if a child is getting distance learning. So whatever is in their IEP to the maximum extent possible, that should be followed. If a child has a paraprofessional, they may have a paraprofessional online at the same time that they are taking a class.
And that's a good question, because how do you handle a one-on-one aid? They're not allowed in the homes. Some private schools do have the paras or teachers going into the home, but the public schools, no. It's a safety risk for everyone involved. So what does it look like if you have a one-on-one?
Well, I have some clients that have one-on-ones. The parapro is either on the phone with the child or on another screen, kind of like how we are right now with Emily. And the parapro sits and attends and might email or text the child to prompt them. So if the child maybe with ADHD and they note that the child is starting to phase away or use something in their room or start playing with something, they can get their attention, whether it be audibly or visually. And so depending on what the need of that para is, they try to give it virtually. Sometimes, the help that they're getting, I do have a case where, we discussed with the district that during this virtual time, they really don't need the one-on-one para that they do need when they are attending in school. So we had a prior written notice issued. We didn't have to have an IEP, but a prior written notice issued that said, for the time that the child is on virtually, we will not have a parapro, but once they return to school, it will be resumed.
And then you could go into a breakout room too.
Yes, you can go in a breakout room, and the parapro could also be available during times when the child's relearning things that they had learned through the program. So terminology. This also can be used interchangeably, but it's not all the same. Online means online with a computer. Virtual doesn't necessarily mean live. It can be either pre-recorded or live. It could also be virtual, that they get sites to go and do work and turn it in. Remote, again, it could be by computer, but it also could be telephonic. We can do this, especially for the vision impaired, we don't necessarily need, visual computers, so they do it telephonically. And again, like I said earlier, it could be by packages, paper packages that are delivered to the house and then returned to the school. It's distance learning, so the child's not actually at school, but getting the work. Digital, and then they could be blended. It could be a hybrid, and I think some districts are even offering that the child could either come to school some days and then other days or getting work at home. I'm still going.
We're still going.
Yeah, I'm still
all
going.
right. Okay. We're sisters, by the way. So
these, once again, these things are often, and even pre-COVID, these words were often used interchangeably, and they are not the same thing. These are really confusing. Homebound, okay? So homebound can be for any student, whether they have a disability or they don't have a disability. The key there is that they have 3 months of not being able to attend school. There has to be a medical certification that is provided by a medical doctor that says that the child cannot attend school for at least 3 months or has a condition that will cause them to have only intermittent attendance, so they can be deemed homebound. The big part of this is that because it's not only for children with disabilities, it is an administrative decision. The administration decides whether a child can be homebound after they get that medical certificate. If you do get homebound services, the norm is, doesn't have to be, it could be more, but the norm is 4 hours a week, and you're only getting the 4 classes. So it's very restrictive, and it's obviously not the best, but for some children, especially with illnesses, that's 4 hours is all they can even handle. But even if it's not, that's all that they're entitled to. Home instruction, the second one on the screen, is a little different. Home instruction is really for students with IEPs, students that actually have an IEP, and their level of service or the least restrictive environment is that they're at home. It is the most restrictive. And this is not made by the administration. The decision is made by the IEP team that the child has to receive instruction at home. And the IEP is followed, and the placement is at their home. And the team decides on what and how and when the curriculum is going to be. And again, it's an individualized curriculum. Last is home.
What does LOSH mean?
Level of service. I thought I said that, but you weren't paying attention. Level of service H means home instruction. So again, most restrictive. Homeschooling. Homeschooling, any child, regular ed, special ed, can be homeschooled. No one has to make the decision other than the family. If the parents want to homeschool, that's fine. The key is that they're cutting the ties with the school. They're saying, sorry, school, or goodbye, school. We're going to take care of the instruction of our child. We provide it. Whether they hire someone to give the home instruction or they do it themselves. And they can do that, but they will not receive any services through the school.
Okay, so just a word about technology. We kind of all know this, but you know, in order to access online instruction, the student must have an internet connection. They must have the device. They must have the computer. And so who is negatively impacted are people of poor income, low income, and also a lot of times kids with IEPs and 504s. They may not have all of the technology that is necessary. We in our office, for instance, have 2 screens. Most kids at home, they may all have to share one computer. And so actually in those cases, we tell the parents to go to the school and say, look, we need, you know, to have iPads. And schools do deliver iPads to the house. When I say deliver, provide the iPads. So kids who are in rural areas, they don't have good internet connection. I live in Scottsdale, I don't have good internet connection. So just imagine what it's like in the further reaches of the state. So you do have a lot of disproportionality. And then the issue is consistency among teachers. There are teachers who just were, especially in the spring when COVID hit, they just weren't comfortable with technology. A lot of schools did train their teachers, sometimes over the summer, to get up to speed, but there'd be disparities in the family between one kid who was getting great services because the teacher knew how to use technology, and the other child had a different teacher who was just not comfortable with it. So, you know, Google Classroom is, a lot of times school districts use that, but again, the teachers have to have that comfort level because they're the ones actually delivering the instruction. So CDC has issued these guiding principles, and that's what has guided a lot of reopening of schools. And so it kind of makes sense that if you have in the lowest risk area, the lowest risk of contracting COVID, that would require the school to be 100% remote, virtual only. When there is more risk, then the schools would allow some small groups. Maybe the kids stay together in these small groups if they go to school. They're 6 feet apart. And that's what we're really seeing in schools now. They're not sharing objects, which is difficult in kindergarten, of course. And then you have these, you could have in-person class structures where they're sitting far away, or some kids go in the morning, some kids go in the afternoon, some kids go on Tuesdays, others go on, you know, Thursdays. And the highest risk, of course, for contracting COVID would be the same as always. Let's just go to school and not, you know, wear any masks. So that is not good. So the American Academy of Pediatrics had said, and this is what started a whole brouhaha in the springtime, you know, kids have to get back to school. Because they said all the policy considerations for this coming school year should start with the goal of having students physically present in school. And this happened around July, and schools here are open a lot of times the end of July or August. And so we know that kids learn better in school. I mean, absolutely. And when we'd have parents who say, I want to homeschool my children, anyone who's online who has been a client of ours knows I say no to homeschooling. Why? Because I think socialization is the most important part of school. I really do. You know, kids, we're teaching them to learn and to live in the real world. We're teaching them to go on to further schooling, to college, hopefully, to get a job, to live independently. They need to learn how to live with other people. They're not going to learn it if they're homeschooled. And I know I do have clients who do have homeschooled with success and a lot of groups, but we know, especially for kids with disabilities, that there is a negative impact to learning while at home only and being away from their peers. And of course, we know from isolation that it can lead to mental and emotional health. Even adults are go a little stir crazy. So we know the importance of having kids go back to school, to being physically present in order to access the curriculum and to benefit socially. So against that, we have to look at, how to do it safely. So after the Pediatric Association came out with that news line, that's when the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, released some resources and tools to support the opening of schools. And these are some of the links. If anyone wants this PowerPoint, just email us. You can just look us up to get our email, and we will send it to you so that you have these links. And CDC talked about, the educational instruction, the importance of the skills development. And so they pretty much parroted what the APA said, that it's critically important for our public health to open schools this fall. And so to do that, of course, the CDC had to issue guidance. And so there is a lot of guidance out there. That's how we know about wearing masks and the social distancing and not sharing objects in school. And it was also important because, like Lori said, a lot of kids get their breakfast and lunch at school. Although during COVID, the breakfast and lunch were being delivered to the homes. And of course, the physical activity, just sitting around all day, we all know that we're not moving as much as we used to. So this is also more guidance that was issued by the United States Department of Education. And they talked about, for instance, that the timelines are all the same. Nothing has changed. This is just all information, probably too much, but we have looked at it all and just can summarize that. Again, what all of this says is that you have to open schools, if you can. Students with disabilities have to be serviced pretty much as they can, as if schools were open.
This is just a sample, though. This isn't an exhaustive list. So there's a lot more.
I mean, you see
it there.
Right. Okay, so.
And then all timelines still have to be met. This is from the United States Department of Education. I know Hope said this, but it's important because a lot of times we get calls and parents say, I know because of COVID that maybe they don't have to hold the IEP on time. Actually, they do. They still have to meet all the timelines. And this applies to all children, and that all children have to have access to education during this time. Students with disabilities have to be provided their FAPE in accordance with their IEPs and their 504s to the maximum extent possible. Equal access to same opportunities, both for children with and without disabilities. COM services are decided on an individualized determination. Since COVID broke out, a lot of children have not received all the services that they were getting pre-COVID. So what we've been doing is telling parents to keep track of what COM services they have not gotten. That does not mean, what services they're not getting. That does not mean that when they get compensatory services, they're going to get minute to minute. They're not. But we will have to make an individualized determination based on where the child is when they return to school and have to catch up and get those COM services, how much they need. So they will have to be evaluated, and it will be on a case-by-case basis. But it can't hurt to keep track of what those services are that you're not getting. Homebound services for students that are sick or at high risk, or can't wear a mask and the school's not allowing them to come. And you consider DLP, the distance learning plan, as a contingency in the IEP. So we can look at the IEP and you might have to change things. I gave an example before where I have a student that does not need the parapro. Just because it's in the IEP, we're not going to insist that they have one that's just sitting there and there's no benefit to it. We make sure that you clarify what is the distance learning. Is it Is it computer? Is it packages? Is it digital? And any of that is okay. So a parent can't say, you know, I don't want to use, I mean, there are exceptions. Obviously, if the child is hearing impaired, there's going to be exceptions. If they're visually impaired, there's going to be exceptions. But there's got to be effective alternative access where where technology is a barrier. For instance, you could have speech recognition. You could have eye tracking. There's different software, screen readers, mouth sticks. There's a lot of out. So you're going to have to involve assistive technology, and that might call for an IEP meeting, which you can have. You have it virtually. You could say, I'd like some help with, you know, assistive technology of what would best my child can utilize.
So there's a fact sheet that was issued from the United States Department of Education, the Office of Civil Rights, which is under that umbrella. This is a tricky one. So schools have to be careful in asking students where they have traveled. It could sound in discrimination. So if you're going to ask students where they travel, then you have to really ask everyone. You can't just ask someone who looks a little different or maybe has an accent. You just have to make sure that you're treating everyone equally, and that you're not targeting someone. Again, IEP teams, they're not required to meet in person. And I had recently where a parent was told they had to meet in person. I said, no, why would you do that? I think that it's safer for everyone, or at least the parent, not to go down to the school building. And so also evaluations, they don't need to be face-to-face assessments. Observations, of course, are a little trickier. Functional behavior assessments are even trickier than that. But evaluations cannot be put off. Now, the only exception to this timeline enforcement was in the spring. There's a rule that says when a parent requests an evaluation of their child for special education or an IEP, synonymous terms, that the school district and charter school had 15 school days to convene a meeting to discuss what would be the red meeting, the review of existing data, or the pre-met meeting. They have 15 school days, okay? So for instance, if a parent requested on the last day of school, they have to wait until school resumes in August. But in that case, when parents were requesting it, schools were saying, and actually the Arizona Department of Education issued guidance saying, you know what, it's not a school day because the schools are closed, even though they were providing online instruction. So that deadline or that timeline doesn't start until schools reopen. Well, schools never really reopened. But the Arizona Department of Education realized, you know, actually schools are open for instruction. So we are treating the first day of the school year, whether the school is open for brick and mortar or just open virtually, that is deemed a school day. So no longer do parents have to wait for an evaluation upon request, except for 15 school days. So these are some of the, these were the first two executive orders that Governor Ducey issued that impacted students. And you see they were both in June. We'll get to the latest one in a minute. But the first one, 2020, which is the year, and the number was 41, and these are numbered consecutively. So there was 42, 43 in between, which didn't have much to do with schools or anything to do with schools. This provided for school districts and charter schools to provide online instruction. And the one that issued at the end of June delayed the start of in-person instruction in schools until August 17th. But schools were allowed to offer distance learning if they provided distance learning plans. Okay, the one that we're operating under now is Arizona Open for Learning is the name of it, and it's 2020-51. So you see there were a lot, the last one was 40-something to 51. And this allowed for return to physical instruction, that meaning brick and mortar, in-person instruction in the physical building. And that was to be determined at the local level. And that's why we have parents who are, you know, angry that their school district didn't open for in-person instruction and the neighboring one did. In-person was delayed to at least August 17th. Distance learning was encouraged to be in real time, synchronous, as opposed to being taped and played back at some other time or recorded. And then if schools were not opening for in-person instruction, schools have to provide the free on-site learning, which Lori talked about before, which is where there's a place for the kids to go. They have meals, they have access to computers, but not necessarily instruction. And I say not necessarily because if a child has an IEP that requires instruction, the school can provide that instruction, or they have to do it virtually via remote through the computer. Now, what's interesting in this order is that there must be notification to directly, not just on a website, directly to parents of children with disabilities, and also foster parents and children who are in the foster system. Schools must contact them directly to discuss the options for learning. And also this executive order said that children 5 years old and up must wear face coverings in school and must social distance.
I don't know about you, but I've heard from some clients that they're not getting that notification. They were not even aware of like the free on-site learning.
And so sometimes we get these calls that schools aren't complying, but remember, this is an executive order. All this really means is that schools should be complying. It is not, it's not a legal, it's not a legal obligation, okay? It's more like guidance. And so what do you do in that case? A parent should be calling the special education department at school, the exceptional student services, whatever it's called in your school district, and say, hey, tell me what my options are. You were supposed to let me know. But there's no way that we can really enforce it. It's not, we can't file a due process complaint. We can't do an Office of Civil Rights complaint. There are just certain things. The executive order, I would say, has what's called no teeth. There's no money attached to it, and that's important because the reason that the IDEA and the IEPs are enforceable is that there's money attached to that. Schools receive money for students with disabilities, but they have to comply with the laws, the IEP laws, as I say, or the IDEA laws. But there's no money attached here, and they can't be dinged. So that's why I like these presentations. I want parents to know what their rights are, but when I say a right, that means you call the school and you say, hey, you're supposed to contact me, but there's no discipline or nothing, nothing that can be done to force the school to do it. Of course, if you do have a complaint, a lot of times we just tell the parents to contact the Arizona Department of Education, Exceptional Student Services. You can get that, just look that up, Google it, and call there, and you can always file a state complaint. And then you don't need an attorney for that.
Or if it could be deemed some type of discrimination, you might have a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights.
So these were the school reopening plans. All the traditional in-person is, makes sense. All students in the physical buildings. Hybrid is physical buildings, and some students distance learning can be combined. Your own child may go to school 2 days a week, at home 3 days a week. Or it could be that the school itself is offering, what do you want to do? Do you want to be in person? Do you want to be at home? So hybrid has taken on a lot of different meanings as well. It could apply to one child, or it could be the whole program that the school has. Virtual is all the students distance learning, and there could be on-site support services. And so intermittent is the intermittent distance learning. That is based on emergency closures. So if numbers spike up, schools get shut down, all right? And that will be determined by the state and local health departments. So this is the Arizona Department of Health Services Schools Toolkit. And schools have to follow the matrix to open. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So there has to be a certain amount of COVID cases the number of COVID cases will determine whether schools can reopen or not. And so the Arizona Department of Health Services issues this information. It contains the metrics or the benchmarks that allow for schools to safely reopen. This is what the cover looks like. There's the link. And so just to give you an example, again, we talked about this before. I believe that these are the benchmarks. This is the CDC definition of community spread. It's minimal if there are isolated cases, moderate if there's sustained continuing transmission, substantial as large-scale community transmission, such as schools and workplaces. So actually, before I go on, and those were the two key components to reopening. You know, how much spread is there, and you know, how are we going to manage it when we do go to school. So these are the benchmarks that are contained in that booklet, and this is from the Arizona Department of Health Services, and it defines the community spread levels and the thresholds. And these thresholds, it shows you, it's very hard to read, and especially Lori has a problem with math. So when it's minimal spread, if there are less than 10 cases for every 100,000 people, and it goes by the county, so Maricopa County, for instance. And if there's minimal spread, then schools can reopen. Moderate spread, they have to be careful. Substantial, then they're not supposed to reopen.
Here are some sites you should bookmark. Some of them are a few weeks or a few months old, but occasionally they are updated. For instance, the special education guidance for COVID-19, the school year 2020-21 was last updated just September 17th, so very recently. And the that page contains guidance and resources for special education students in public schools and charter schools or public schools related to COVID-19 for the anticipated 2021 school year. Then you have the COVID-19 guidance and suggestions. This PowerPoint was finalized September 19th, and the web pages were last updated September 18th, so it might even be more updated as of now, but you can go and check that out. The Q&A is the page that provides lots of information, many special education topics, including the compensatory. So if you have questions about compensatory, which can be confusing, that's a good place to look.
And so with compensatory, what we do is we've asked parents to make a spreadsheet if they can, or just they should be keeping tabs on what their children are getting. And parents didn't know to be prepared for this in the spring, so it was hard. But now we want you to look at the child's IEP, look at the service page and the minutes that is supposed to be provided. And then just write down every day what the child is receiving, like a little diary. What are they getting? Sometimes it's hard to connect, so that was cause for concern. Things have been improved. But also, if you are having any problems, the first thing you do is contact your case manager. You have a child on an IEP, there's a case manager, or the coordinator at the school. So call them, email them. Email is good because there's a nice little record of everything. Say, I'm having problems connecting, or I didn't see the aid today. Okay, sometimes there, again, if your child's supposed to have a one-on-one aid, that one-on-one aid must be available online.
And schools are or should be aware that sometimes with poor connections or difficulties and people going in and out of the site, this can cause more anxiety for the students that are already having anxiety. So you do want to report that too.
Okay, so here's the mask. Love this one. It's hard to see it. You see, this is what I would anticipate a kindergarten class to look like. And I was a teacher in New York for 18 years, and I taught students with emotional disabilities. And I can only imagine what would have happened with those masks. But we're not hearing as many complaints because we know over the summer, especially parents of students with autism, they were modeling that behavior. So we know of students who are very sensitive, hypersensitive, but the parents, and it doesn't apply to everyone, every kid is different, but we're modeling the mask behavior and practicing at home and practicing outside.
There are districts that are handling the mask issues differently. Some are more acceptable of students that cannot wear masks. Our recommendation when that is the circumstance, we advise parents that they should get medical notes if necessary and provide them. Sometimes there are still some districts that are not agreeing to that, and we have to get involved. There are other school districts that don't even require a note because they say, well, we know Johnny and we understand that he has those issues and he's not going to be able to wear a mask. So we get that. So all districts are handling it differently, but you should find that out. And if you do need it, I think the first thing you should do is try to get a note if you can from a medical care provider.
And yeah, there's no consistency. And sometimes, like I had one of my clients call me and said, you know, my kid can't wear a mask. And I said, oh, but your kid can wear a mask. So don't look for sympathy from me if I think that your child can wear a mask. I don't like wearing a mask. I know it's 100 times worse for a child who's got sensory issues, but you know, you got to try it. So here are some questions, and you can ask questions in the Q&A. So IEPs were required to be implemented during the mandated closure. And we did learn that some were not. We had hoped that people would have called us during closure rather than waiting until the summer, because we could have addressed it then, as we did when people did call compensatory services or educational, or what we call comp services. Again, that is an individualized, made on an individualized basis. If your child did not receive all the services that they should have in, for instance, reading instruction, if they have reading services and reading goals, and remember, you don't have to have a learning disability. It could be your child has autism, but they have a need in reading. You would have the reading services, but your child did not regress. Maybe because you're a phenomenal parent, which all of you are, and so you helped your child. It's hard to ask for the comp services at that point. Now, of course, you're not going to let your child just sit and do nothing if they're not receiving the services. You're probably helping, but you can tell the school, look, you know, you didn't give my child any services. They didn't regress, but that was because of me. So then it becomes kind of a dispute with the school. Will you make sure you provide the services, add a few minutes, because it just wasn't there. But unless your child regressed, it's a hard claim to make that you're owed that. So one of the things that schools look at is they look at the progress versus regression, and the parent input. What did you do? You know, how much did you have to provide? And of course, if you went and you got your child Kumin or something like that, you're not entitled to get that money back unless you told the school, okay? So if you ever provide services for your child because you think that they're not receiving them, so if you're paying for private services, tutoring or something, always let the school know, and let the school know that, hey, look, I don't think you're providing the services you should, so I'm going to provide services. I'm going to pay for a tutor. I'm going to take them to Kumon, which doesn't really provide specialized education, but anyway, and just keep tabs of that and let the school know that you're going to seek reimbursement, because that is the only way that you're ever going to get that reimbursement, is by saying, I'm giving you notice that I'm paying for this, and I'm going to ask you to pay me back for that. Okay, and make sure that's in an email.
Before you leave compensatory, the other thing you can look at, it's getting a little past the time to do it, but you should look to see your progress reports from the end of last year. If for the fourth quarter, that fourth progress report, I've been seeing this more than I thought I would. It says on there, you know, due to COVID-19, we didn't, you know, mark or keep track of the progress. you might have a claim there for compensatory services because they were required to keep track, even virtually, of the progress that the student made. So I have seen some IEPs that have not had that, and we were able to get some comp services for that.
SDI is your specially designed instruction. The reason I put that in there is, how can that be provided online? It can, that's the instruction that your child is to receive. The specially designed instruction is what you see basically on the services page. It's individualized for your student or your child to meet the needs that arise from their disability. Signing documents. How many of you are missing the signed document for your IEP? So everyone was sitting virtually. It should be signed, but you can write to the school and say, I would like to see everyone's signature on it. So that means everyone will have to sign it and send it. You may have one person's name on one and then someone else's name on another one.
Separate
pages. Okay.
But it's appropriate.
Before COVID, we wanted to see that. We wanted to see who signed, who may have left a meeting early, who may have signed, who was not there. So you should have a signed document, but I can't say it's a violation if you're missing it. If you were at the IEP meeting and it was discussed and you all agreed on everything, you may not have a signed IEP, but you should ask for it.
Many of the IEPs that are virtual are being recorded. So that's another thing. If the school wants to record it, I don't have a problem with that at all. In fact, we advocate recording meetings. So.
And you can, parents don't have to tell the school district you're recording it unless you're an attorney with your parent hat on. There's an ethical opinion on that. So, but we always like our parents to have full disclosure, open communication, to be honest and say, look, I'm going to record this. And why do you want to record it? Because you may forget about it. Maybe only one parent is attending the IEP meeting and, dad goes and mom's asking him all these questions. This way dad could say, I recorded the meeting, you go listen to it. So it's not just preparing for litigation, okay? Not every time you go to a meeting are you thinking, well, we're gonna go to a lawyer. You just really wanna have a record of it because you'll forget what was said. So it's nice. I mean, when I am attending an IEP meeting with a parent, I always say I'm recording it. I don't think I've ever had occasion to listen to it again, but I give it to my client and so they have it. The school day, that is a school day now. That is different than it was, like I said, in the spring. It is now any day that school is open for instruction, which could be even just virtually. If the student is home, the LRE is not changed to an age. We were getting a lot of those questions. They're not considered a home instruction child. It is just that they're learning remotely. Child fine, Lori.
Child fine. The obligations are still there for the school. A little harder than it was before because they're supposed to be looking for children that are having difficulties. So sometimes they don't have the everyday observations of that student, but especially if it is online, virtually, visually, they can be looking. But even from just the work that's being done, even if it's packages that are going back and forth, they should be able to tell if the child is struggling, not providing the work, not providing it on time, grades are going down. So child fine obligations are still there for the district.
Remember, this applies a lot to children who are brand new to school. But of course, it could rise at any time. A kid could be fined in first, second, third grade, and fourth grade. All of a sudden, you start seeing learning problems, or you start seeing some kind of distractibility. But for new students, if your child never had an IEP, was never evaluated, the school must fill out what's called the 45-day screener. 45 days into the school year, 45 calendar days, there has to be a screener. That is invaluable. Parents, please ask for it, okay? And that assesses, it screens a child. It's not an evaluation, just looks at the child, okay? How are they intellectually? Are they getting along with other people? What is their physical development like? So it has different areas: cognitive, social, emotional, adaptive. But you want to see that. A lot of times you could see that on a screen. If I'm looking out the window, or I keep getting up, I may have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So there are different things to see. Or if I'm sitting here with my sister and I keep punching her in the face, chances are I may have a sensory issue, or I could have, or it could be a conduct disorder, I could have emotional disability. But, you know, you see things, you can see a lot, you know, when you're watching TV, you can see a lot. You can say, oh, I think that actor is making believe, or they have autism. I mean, can see a lot of stuff. Okay, so changes to IEPs are not, evaluations. Our evaluations go on. They have to continue. IEEs, independent educational evaluations, are being conducted. We know a lot of evaluators who are actually conducting in person. They have shields. We know one office that actually has an air filtration system, and they have plexiglass. So they have all the precautions there. Changes to IEPs are not necessary. We're not telling you to, you know, we're cognizant too of, we know it's a strain on all of you as parents. It's also a strain on the teachers. So to, you know, have the IEP meetings, of course, we're your advocates, but we're mindful that, you know, you get more with honey than you do with vinegar. So
unless it's the annual IEP, they still,
you know, ask for it. Say, you know what, I'm concerned about my kid's IEP. I don't even need a whole meeting. We can do it because the law allows for you to make changes to the IEP by email. Of course, now IEPs, convening them is easy because you could do it by Zoom, so it is a lot easier. But if you are concerned about your child's education and the IEP cannot be implemented remotely, they should all be written so that you can really implement them remotely. If you can't, then ask for an IEP meeting. And say, hey, I'll make it convenient. We don't even need, well, it would be a legal violation not to have like a SPED teacher and a general ed and all the team members there. But if it's something that can be resolved without an IEP, write to the case manager. And a lot of times you guys will call me and I'll say, just call the SPED director and say you spoke to Hope, and Hope says, we can resolve it without an IEP meeting. You might be able to do that. You want to make it as easy as you can. You don't want to cause stress to you at all. So if there's an easy way and a hard way to do it the easy way. What if a student won't wear a mask? At least one phone call a day. At least one phone call a day. In those cases, we will, you know, we'll give you advice, or we'll just call the attorney and say, you know, what can we do? What do you need from us? But we want to know why your child can't wear a mask. If it's because you don't want him or her to, that's different. But if there is some kind of a respiratory issue, whatever it is, we want to know before we pick up the phone to call the school district and say, you really need to address this issue now.
keep in mind that some schools are disciplining students that don't wear a mask. If that happens and your child has a disability, it might be a manifestation of their disability that they won't wear the mask. So they they shouldn't be disciplined. So that could be an issue.
Yes, we are dealing now with an issue where a school is sending a child into a seclusion room for not wearing a mask. So not good.
So we do have a question, Hope, if I can interrupt for just a minute. Somebody's asking about if you're going to go over the 504 information, particularly about online and at-home schooling. Is that something you might be able to address in these last couple minutes?
Sure, and I'm sorry, I didn't see that question. I think I have, sorry. So with the 504, well, your accommodation, some will.
Oh, crap.
Can you hear us?
She's saying yes.
Huh. Was I muted at all? Am I muted now?
No, you're good now.
Okay. Okay, so it depends on what the accommodations are. So if you can answer me what the accommodations are, but extra time you're going to, if you want a quiet room, that doesn't really apply, okay? So it depends, but the 504 must be complied with as reasonably as possible.
To the
okay?
maximum
To the
extent.
maximum extent that they can. So yeah, you do have to, it has to be complied with. Yes. Is there a specific accommodation that, I don't see the questions, but is there a specific accommodation that they were wondering about?
It says visual/occupational.
Okay, so occupation, well, I don't know what occupation. So anything that the child needs, say for instance, a slant board, whatever would be provided in school must be provided at home. Okay, so the school must provide those assistive technology at home. And so visually impaired, it depends what the accommodation is. If the school is not complying with the accommodations, the first thing we do is we always say, call your, in that case, call the 504 coordinator and let them know. Maybe they don't know. Call and follow up with an email. Then for not complying with the 504, and sometimes not complying with an IEP, a parent could go online and file an Office of Civil Rights complaint. But I use that as the last resort. Try to work it out with the school because it'll be certainly much quicker if you can resolve it. You know, I've seen cases where parents have filed OCR complaints and then the school attorney will call me and say, hey, Hope, no one ever told us about it. You know, so do that first. But
Yeah, they had one other comment, and since I don't know your area of practice at all, I'm just going to read the words because I don't know what it means. It says more time for reading all the school content. Does that ring any bells or no?
more, it depends if there are periods in there or whatever. So they have to have as much time as needed. So academics, I mean, general ed has to be complied with, but also more time for reading. If the child needs more time, time and a half, they have to get that, just as the same as if they were in school.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And then we are almost done. So we're going to finish up with our tips to you guys. Ask about communication. And that, what that really means is what's the best way, you know, you want me to communicate with you parents now? How should I communicate with the teacher? Should I email? Just write to the case manager. Start with the teacher, then the case manager, and say what's the best way for us to communicate. As far as the mask and sending your kids to school, consult with your child's doctor, pediatrician, you know, if it's to make sure it's safe. Get a doctor's note if there's concern. That arose in a case I have where, you know, sometimes the parents want the kids to go to school and schools aren't open. Other cases I have where the parents are concerned about the kids going to school. Here's an issue that comes up. Sometimes schools say to parents, we can only provide your child a FAPE, an appropriate education, if your child is here. Well, the parents don't want their child here. Maybe their parents are healthcare workers and they're scared. Maybe the child has some immunological issues or is at risk. Schools have issued prior written notices saying we can only provide you with or for you a FAPE if you're here. That doesn't mean that the school can cut off the online access. They can't say you're here or there's nothing. They can say, okay, this is our offer. You're learning online, but that's not we think is a. But if you have a concern about your child attending, get a doctor's note. You have a concern about your child wearing a mask, get a doctor's note. The delivery of instructions still must be individualized, okay? So you have the gen ed, but you also have where you can have a one-on-one, where you can have a breakout room. Just make sure that your child's instruction, your IEP is being followed, it's individualized. Comp services must be individualized. You can ask the IEP to include a contingency plan for further outbreaks. I'm kind of going away from that advice now. Because I think schools are learning that there could be a closure any day now, and they'll provide for those services. And the IEP should be written so they're implemented in a remote learning environment. And then keep a daily log of the services provided, and it is 1 o'clock. Any other questions?
I don't see any other questions in the chat box or in the Q&A. I want to thank you guys so much for an outstanding presentation about what has turned into a whole other practice in terms of all the layers on top of what's really hard for parents and teachers in the school system, as well as for advocates, to make sure that kids, especially those with special needs, are getting everything they need. And now we have this extra layer of safety and health and CDC guidance and everything else that seems to change on a daily basis. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for putting this together. Thank you to all of the parents who were able to listen. It is recorded, so both at Hope and Lori's office as well as at our office, we'll be posting that, and you can send it out to links for friends and family who might also find it interesting. So I wish everybody to stay healthy and safe and take care of your loved ones, and we will see you soon. And I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar, but I thank you so much, and take care and all the best.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.